Hey guys, tonight we slip into something a little more fragrant. You're walking through a bustling Roman street market. The sky is honey gold, slanting shadows across tiled roofs and marble steps. The noise is low and rhythmic, donkeys braying, bronze pans clanging, merchants barking half-heartedly. But more than anything else, you smell it. Warm olive oil steeped in lavender, crushed rose petals drifting from a passing noblewoman's cloak, and a lingering hint of something earthy and unfamiliar, maybe spikenard or myrrh. You're here not to shop for figs or listen to a philosopher ramble in the forum. No, tonight you're here to learn the forgotten, slightly ridiculous, and oddly tender story of how the Romans made perfume. You probably wouldn't survive a Roman street in sandals, let alone a Roman lab full of boiling resins and goat fat. The hygiene standards were, let's say, interpretive, but somehow they managed to invent beauty from sweat, elegance from decay. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from and what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into a shadowy apothecary tucked behind a fishmonger. Not the most ideal neighbour, olfactorily speaking. Inside, terracotta flasks glint with oil, dried herbs hang like sleepy bats from the rafters, and a young apprentice squints over a tiny brazier. She's stirring something that smells like burnt thyme and ambition. This is your first lesson in Roman perfumery. The nose is everything. Romans weren't subtle about it. To smell nice was to be powerful, appealing, respectable, even godlike. But to smell too nice? Well, that could raise eyebrows. Even in the earliest Roman days, before emperors made everything extra, perfume wasn't just a dab on the wrist. It was politics, hygiene, flirtation, and occasionally an attempt to ward off evil spirits. You know, just in case the cologne didn't work on your in-laws. Historians still argue whether the Romans invented their perfume practices independently or adapted them wholesale from the Egyptians and Greeks. The answer is probably a little of both. Rome had a habit of collecting shiny things from other civilizations and claiming them as improved. Your sandals clack on a mosaic floor depicting Venus holding a bottle. Not a scroll, not a mirror, a bottle. That tells you everything. For Romans, scent wasn't frivolous, it was sacred. Even in death, they buried you with your favorite oil, maybe a bit of frankincense, just in case the afterlife had less than ideal ventilation. The shops selling perfume weren't always high-end boutiques. Sometimes they were side hustles run out of bathhouses or little stalls near temples. The ingredients? Wildly variable. One recipe called for cardamom, cinnamon, and saffron mixed with wine-soaked rose petals. Another involved, you might want to brace yourself, crushed beetles and fermented fish sauce. Yes, for the scent, allegedly. You duck into a back room where shelves groan under amphorae labelled in fading Latin. The most prized oils came from Arabia, India, and Africa. They smelled of heat and mystery, and they cost more than a senator's ego. Which is saying something. Perfume also served as a sort of personal biography. A whiff of a specific blend could tell you someone's wealth, marital status, even their regional roots. Think of it like a Roman version of LinkedIn, but for your nose. And if you were really wealthy, you didn't just wear scent, you lived in it. The cushions in your triclinium, that's your fancy dining room, would be soaked in iris oil. Your wine might be perfumed with crushed violets, your walls, painted with blends designed to release a soft aroma as the plaster aged. One famously dramatic emperor, Heliogabalus, allegedly had perfume piped into his banquet halls. He even tried to install a ceiling that would sprinkle rose petals over his guests, though one particularly unlucky noble was reportedly smothered in the process. Smelled great, died confused. And yet, despite all the extravagance, perfume was strangely democratic. Even lower-class Romans found ways to mimic the elite. They might boil herbs at home, or save up for a tiny vial of myrtle oil. It was a little bottle of aspiration, and unlike togas, it didn't need tailoring. The apprentice beside you has finished stirring. She pours the concoction, thick and golden, into a squat glass flask and hands it to you. It smells ancient. Not in a musty, attic-y way, but deep, like sun-warmed resin and memory. You can almost hear sandalwood trees sighing in the breeze and the low murmur of markets thousands of miles away. In this moment, you're not just visiting Rome. You're living in its quiet details, in the way a senator might dab his neck before entering court, or a bride might anoint her wrists before marriage. These were not just scents. They were symbols, rituals, even identities. And tomorrow we'll dig deeper into the wild roots of this obsession, the bitter debates over dolphin fat, and the way a perfectly blended oil could ruin, or save, a reputation. But for now the oil glimmers softly in your hand. The apprentice yawns, the lantern flickers, and the scent of time lingers in the warm Roman air. You wander through the market again, but now with different eyes, or rather a different nose. The scents aren't just smells anymore, they're clues, traces of trade, status, and empire. But long before Rome doused its patricians in exotic oils, someone else was already playing the perfume game with far more flair. To really understand Roman perfume, you have to rewind the olfactory clock. Head east, and a bit south, to the lands of the Nile and the Tigris. Picture yourself now, standing on the sun-baked banks of the Euphrates, surrounded by trays of crushed flowers drying in the heat. Before the Romans, it was the Egyptians and Mesopotamians who set the stage. And, oh, they weren't subtle either. Egyptians loved scent. It was as crucial as eyeliner or pyramid alignment. Everyone from pharaohs to fishermen dabbled in oils. Perfume was spiritual, medicinal, even political. You might walk into a temple and see priests anointing statues of gods with sacred blends, part ritual, part very fancy aromatherapy. Cleopatra herself was said to scent the sails of her ship so they'd announce her presence on the breeze. Imagine a perfume so potent it arrived before you did. That's not just fashion, that's strategy. The Mesopotamians, meanwhile, approached perfume with a mix of chemistry and poetry. Clay tablets from 1200 BCE describe elaborate recipes involving calamus, cyperus, and cedarwood. These weren't slapdash spritzes. They were slow, smoky infusions, months of work to create a scent that lingered like a ghost. Historians still debate whether the Mesopotamians actually wore these perfumes or just used them ceremonially. There's evidence either way depending on which cuneiform tablet you squint at. What's certain is this: the Greeks picked up the habit next. They took the techniques of Egypt and Mesopotamia, added a bit of Homeric drama, and sprinkled in their own philosophy. Scent became something to contemplate. Aristotle even mused about it, though he was more of a natural musk guy than a floral blend enthusiast. By the time Rome showed up to the fragrant party, everyone else had already made introductions. But Rome didn't mind being late. Rome never did. They just took a look around, sampled the best oils, hired some Greek artisans, and called it innovation. You're now in a Roman villa, perched on the edge of Naples Bay, somewhere in the early 1st century CE. The owner is wealthy, of course, and his atrium is filled with scent, not just for the guests, but for the marble. Perfumed waxes are rubbed into the columns and floor tiles, so the entire room smells faintly of pine resin and burnt orange. This is your next lesson. In Rome, perfume didn't stay on the skin. It seeped into everything. The line between sacred and profane, body and object, was blurry. If something could absorb scent, it was fair game. Back in the market, a seller leans over a stall of pressed oils. He lifts a tiny ceramic amphora and unstoppers it with a dramatic flourish. You sniff. It's sharp, maybe spikenard, maybe cedar. Hard to tell. Your nose is still a trainee. He tells you it's a blend imported from India by way of Alexandria, with base notes of cinnamon bark and something he won't name. Trade secrets, he winks, and then he adds, "We Romans learned from the best, but we blend better." A bold claim, but not an empty one. Roman perfumers eventually began experimenting in ways that would have made their predecessors twitch. They layered smells, They reversed maceration orders. They played with temperature, fermentation, even moon phases. One old manual recommends starting the oil infusion at a waxing crescent for better scent retention. Whether that worked is, let's say, debated. And yet the perfume didn't just stick to elites or temples. Even soldiers took oils on campaign, not for vanity, but for comfort. Imagine marching through Gaul with your sword in one hand and a flask of lavender in your kit. Or the world might smell like mud and wool cloaks, but one drop behind the ears and suddenly you're back home. There's something strangely intimate about all this. These were people obsessed with transience. Empires rose and fell, but a good perfume? That was memory you could wear. You pause near a small fountain, and a boy tosses in a coin. The scent of crushed mint drifts from a nearby kitchen, mixing with the perfume lingering on your sleeve. It's a quiet moment, but it hums with history. Romans didn't invent perfume, but they did elevate it. They gave it social weight, religious charge, joyous charge, and bureaucratic importance. They scented letters and contracts. They scented floors and tombs. They even scented the ashes of the dead. It was more than luxury. It was legacy. And now, with your senses sharpened and your curiosity piqued, you're ready to see how the Romans turned flowers, spices, and a bit of animal fat into bottles of silent power. But first, maybe another sniff of that spicy blend from Alexandria.
Just for research, you're back.
In the atrium of a senator's house, and something peculiar is happening. A slave scurries past carrying a tiny silver dish, not with fruit or wine, but with a thin cloth soaked in perfume. She carefully lays it across a guest's lap as they recline on a couch, and no one seems fazed. Welcome to the world where politics and perfume go hand in hand, sometimes literally. Here's your new Roman reality. Scent isn't just about smelling pleasant. It's about sending a message. If you're a senator walking into the Curia Julia smelling like imported iris oil, everyone knows you didn't just roll out of bed. That scent says, I have influence, I have wealth, I have a supplier who deals directly with Arabia. Think of it like ancient cologne diplomacy. One whiff of your custom blend, and suddenly your opponent's toga feels a little too plain. Historians still argue whether Julius Caesar himself actually wore rose-scented oil every day, but the rumor alone was enough to build a legacy. In Roman politics, perception mattered, and scent was part of the ensemble, right alongside your sandals, your rhetoric, and your ever-so-casually displayed signet ring. You walk now into the shadowy back room of a political dinner party. The lamps flicker with thick smoke, and the smell of roasted dormice mingles with something floral. You wouldn't expect jasmine in a room like this, but it's there, drifting faintly from a senator's cloak. That's no accident. Romans often infused their clothes with perfume, using a technique involving heated stones and damp fabric. You'd place your cloak over the steam until it absorbed just enough scent to turn heads without overwhelming noses. And speaking of overwhelming, enter Nero. Nero, Rome's most theatrical emperor, if not its most stable. Nero reportedly had entire halls doused with perfume before his dramatic entrances. His garden parties, suffused with airborne rosewater, pumped in via hidden pipes. Subtlety was not his strong suit, but even your average politician knew the power of a well-timed whiff. Perfumed letters were common among the elite. You could seal a scroll with wax and a drop of violet oil, leaving your rivals wondering if they were being flattered or mocked. And don't forget courtroom strategy. More than one advocate rubbed scented oils into their palms before pleading a case, perhaps hoping the judge would associate their argument with comfort, not contempt. The blending of scent and power wasn't just personal, it was architectural. You find yourself now in the peristyle garden of a well-appointed domus, where citrus trees and lavender bushes have been placed strategically. Not for beauty, for breeze control. Romans loved their cross-ventilation, and a properly scented gust of wind could elevate your entire afternoon. That's what you call passive-aggressive landscaping. Now here's where it gets complicated. Not everyone approved. Cato, the elder, Rome's resident grump, frequently complained that perfume softened the moral fibre of the Republic. He thought a good Roman should smell like olive oil, iron and duty. Maybe a bit of smoke for flair. Anything more, and you were suspect. This moral judgment extended to the lower classes too. If a freedman wore too much scent in public, people noticed, and not kindly. The phrase unmasculine excess gets thrown around in a few surviving texts. As if the wrong kind of myrrh could make you politically suspicious, and yet the upper class never stopped scenting themselves, because, frankly, they could afford to. A single vial of premium imported oil could cost more than a legionary earned in a month. For some, that was the whole point. You drift past a group of men lounging on cushions arguing over proposed tax reforms. But one of them, an ambitious upstart from Hispania, is quietly making waves. His scent, subtle, bay leaf, maybe a hint of saffron. It's clever. Local ingredients, lightly used. He smells like home, but elevated, it's working. Perfume wasn't just about allure, it was about calculation. It was the difference between being remembered and being overlooked. And in a city where reputation could rise or fall by rumour alone, every detail mattered. But here's something curious. While men used perfume for power, women wielded it for complexity, intrigue, even manipulation. But that's another story, and we'll get to it. For now, you step back into the fading light of the atrium. The air smells faintly of honey and old stone. Politics are done for the day, but the scent remains, as if the arguments still linger, hovering above the marble, like invisible laurels. The atrium is quiet now. The last of the guests have left, their sandals clicking down the mosaic hallway, trailing hints of sandalwood and saffron. You're left alone with the subtle perfume still clinging to the draperies and a sense that Rome was not just a city, it was a scentscape, and you haven't even stepped into the boudoir yet. Tonight, you're slipping into the private world of Roman women, where scent was seduction, power, ritual, and sometimes rebellion. You follow the soft scrape of slippers down a marble corridor and into a woman's dressing room. This isn't some dusty nook, it's a curated shrine to self-presentation. There's a low couch draped in linen, bronze mirrors that warp your reflection just slightly, and a carved shelf lined with alabaster jars, each containing something precious. Rose oil, iris paste, crushed cinnamon bark suspended in goose fat. She's seated with a handmaid behind her, braiding hair and dabbing perfume into the hollow of her throat. This part is ritual, a slow, practiced rhythm. It's not rushed. Every motion matters. In Roman culture, a woman's perfume wasn't just about attraction, it was about control. The right scent could disguise, distract, or enchant. A whiff of expensive oil might announce her status before she even opened her mouth. But beware, too much perfume and you might be accused of lascivia, loosely translated as wantonness. There was a delicate line between elegance and impropriety, and it often shifted depending on who was sniffing. Historians still argue whether upper-class Roman women wore perfume in public regularly, or saved it mostly for domestic life. Some sources claim that matrons wore perfume on feast days and religious occasions. Others hint that many wore it daily, carefully, subtly, a whisper of myrtle, not a shout of musk. One thing's certain, the most respected Roman women knew their blends. They didn't just wear scent, they understood it. Recipes were passed down, guarded and tweaked over generations. You might find a widow scenting her late husband's toga before packing it away, or a young bride mixing her mother's wedding oil with her own new favourite, creating something half memory, half hope. And then there's the case of Messalina. Oh, Messalina, Emperor Claudius's wife and Rome's most infamous femme fatale, though modern historians are still debating how much of her reputation was politics and how much was perfume. Ancient sources accused her of wearing intoxicating blends while sneaking into taverns disguised as a commoner. Her scent? Said to be unmistakable. Was it legend, smear campaign, or just very good marketing. You leave the villa now and enter a perfumery near the baths, a place where women of all classes might shop. The air is thick with the smell of cassia, lavender, and hot oil. A middle-aged woman inspects a jar of cedar paste, while a young girl giggles over something that smells suspiciously like clove and honey. This is your next lesson. Scent was a bridge across class. Yes, the rich could afford imported balms from India or Arabia, but even the working poor could experiment. They might infuse their own oil with local herbs, thyme, mint, or sage, boiled at home over a fire. It might not last long on the skin, but for a few hours, they too could feel transformed. You spot a priestess outside the Temple of Venus, dabbing a sacred blend on her palms before performing a small rite. Religious perfumes were often made with frankincense, myrrh, and rare woods. These weren't for seduction, they were for transcendence. But even then, the lines blurred. After all, Venus was the goddess of both love and perfume. Here's a fringe fact. Some Romans believed certain scents could influence fate. An oil made from nard might be worn during childbirth. Another might be used to repel envy. One old wives' tale claimed that rubbing laurel-scented oil into your scalp could increase your chances of bearing sons. Spoiler, it did not work, but it probably made you easier to stand next to during labour. You walk now through a garden of a well-to-do domus. It's dusk, and the air is perfumed with actual flowers, roses, jasmine, violets. Roman women often grew their own ingredients. They'd steep petals in oil, press them with heated stones or sun-infused mixtures for days. It was chemistry, artistry, and patience. No lab coats, just intuition and sunshine. You pass a window where a woman leans out, speaking to her neighbour. They compare recipes, laugh about last week's failed batch, smelled like burnt onions and betrayal, and promise to swap jars tomorrow. It's a quiet moment, intimate, almost modern. Perfume for Roman women was a form of authorship, a way to write themselves into the world without parchment, ink, or permission. Just scent. And as the stars emerge over the tiled rooftops, you understand something subtle but powerful. In a world where women were often seen but not heard, they made sure to be remembered by their scent. You slip back into the bustle of the Roman streets, your nose already adjusting to the contrasts, baked bread from a nearby taberna, the earthy scent of horse-drawn carts, the faint tang of sea air if you're near the port. And then there's a familiar aroma trailing behind a passing citizen. It's bitter, resinous, almost medicinal. Congratulations. You've just encountered a Roman wearing kai-fi, a powerful Egyptian blend known for its spiritual kick and its very polarizing smell. Today, you're chasing perfume across continents. Rome, with its endless appetite for trade, didn't just conquer people, it conquered smells. And that meant importing ingredients, sometimes across thousands of dusty, bandit-ridden miles. You're now walking beside a merchant unloading amphorae from a ship docked at Ostia. The air is sharp with sea brine and frankincense. These containers have travelled from Arabia, Felix, modern-day Yemen, via camel, caravan, ship, and more camel. Inside, resin, not gold, not jewels, just hardened tree sap, worth its weight in silver. Let's break this down. Frankincense and myrrh were huge in Roman perfumery. These weren't subtle, they were smoky, sacred, and slightly bitter, perfect as base notes and often burned in rituals. But getting them was no picnic. Roman merchants relied on the famed incense routes that zigzagged through hostile desert terrain, taxed at every stop, and guarded by Nabatean traders who were excellent negotiators and even better at spotting counterfeit goods. Historians still argue whether the Romans ever fully mapped the entire route or just relied on middlemen. Either way, the costs were staggering, and yet the demand never slowed. From Arabia, you sailed to India. Roman ships followed the monsoon winds to ports along the Malabar coast in search of cardamom, cinnamon, and the elusive spikenard. Now spikenard, imagine something earthy and musky with just a hint of violet, was one of Rome's most prized scent ingredients, used in everything from hair oil to funeral rites, And how did they carry it? Not in barrels, oh no, in goat bladders. Yes, you heard that right. Apparently, goat bladders were an ideal container for preserving the freshness of spikenard during long voyages. Less ideal for anyone unpacking it. You move inland now through the silk routes, through Bactria, Sogdiana, across dusty towns where Chinese silk brushed against Persian saffron and Roman denarii. You pass through Palmyra, one of the great caravan cities, where scent was currency, literally and figuratively. A good merchant could name 30 kinds of cinnamon blindfolded. Closer to home, Egypt remained a perfume powerhouse. Roman Alexandria was not only a port, but a fragrance hub. Imagine walking through the warehouse district where oils were blended and bottled before heading north to the capital. You might pass massive clay vats of lotus-infused oil, some of it reserved for temples, some of it for the ultra-rich, and some of it destined to be watered down and sold under shady names like authentic Arabian essence. By the way, Rome had knockoffs. Don't be fooled. A merchant might swear you're getting pure Indian sandalwood, but if it smells a bit too much like olive oil and ambition, well, back in the Roman Forum, perfumers had their own guilds. They were respected, though never quite elite. Still, the best ones were household names. If you were anyone in Roman society, you had your perfumer, just like your tailor, your wine merchant, and your guy who knew a guy at the arena who could get you better seats. You pause now beside a travelling peddler. His cart is a wonderland of tiny vials, crushed powders, dried petals wrapped in linen. He offers you a whiff of something called Nubian Delight. It smells like fig syrup and moss. Not bad. Possibly invented 5 minutes ago. Here's a quirky tidbit. Roman perfumers were notorious for branding. Some stamped their names into the bottom of ceramic scent bottles, early product placement. Others wrapped their vials in coloured ribbons to signal exclusivity. The ancient version of "this perfume is not available in stores," but as much as the ingredients travelled, so did the techniques. Romans learned maceration from the Greeks, who'd learned it from the Egyptians. They adapted distillation methods from Eastern alchemists and refined the use of enfleurage, a delicate process of absorbing scent into fat using fresh petals over several days. You stop at a stall where this process is on full display. A shallow tray of olive oil holds violets gently crushed and warmed by the sun. A young girl carefully removes them with tweezers and replaces them with fresh petals. The whole thing takes over a week. It's labor-intensive, precise, and absolutely necessary for the good stuff. You realize now, Roman perfume wasn't about speed. It was about layers, ingredient, method, origin, prestige. And every element had a journey. You breathe in deeply. Somewhere in that bouquet is the sweat of a merchant crossing the Hindu Kush, the prayers of a temple servant in Thebes, and the careful hands of a woman standing in her garden at dusk. Roman perfume was never truly Roman. It was a travelling story, bottled. By now, your nose has travelled halfway around the ancient world. But tonight, we're getting even closer to the raw, messy, steamy centre of Roman perfume production. You're stepping inside the officina, a Roman perfumer's workshop, and, fair warning, it doesn't smell quite like roses, not at first. You push aside a beaded curtain, more for flies than flair, and are greeted with an odd mix: crushed herbs, fermenting oil, maybe a hint of goat. Definitely not what you'd want behind your ears. Yet. The room is cramped, sunlit through a high window, and cluttered with amphorae, mortars, clay bowls, reeds, funnels, and baskets of dried petals. A young assistant, probably a nephew or slave, is pounding something rhythmically in a stone mortar. It might be cinnamon bark, might be galbanum resin, might be last week's failed experiment. Let's talk process. The first thing every Roman perfume needs is a carrier oil, and this is where things get slippery. Olive oil was the base of choice, but not just any olive oil. You couldn't use the everyday stuff slathered on bread or rubbed into gladiators. You needed omphacium, oil from unripe green olives, pressed cold and lightly filtered, less pungent, less likely to go rancid in a week. Historians still argue whether Roman perfumers had reliable ways to stabilize these oils for long-term use, or whether everyone just pretended not to notice when their perfume started smelling like salad dressing. Next step, infusion. You sit beside the fire pit where oils warm gently in bronze pans. A perfumer stirs a mixture of oil and crushed iris root with a wooden stick, slowly releasing scent into fat. Sometimes they'd macerate the ingredients, crushing flowers or spices and soaking them in oil for days or weeks. Other times they'd use enfleurage, a surprisingly delicate technique for a culture so fond of conquest. Picture this: flower petals spread on a layer of warm animal fat, usually goose or pig, gently pressed until the fat absorbs the fragrance. The petals are replaced daily until the fat is fully scented. The final product, called unguentum, is then scraped into a small jar and sealed with wax. It's rich, it's decadent. And if you forget it in the sun, it's soup. Now comes the artistry, blending. A master perfumer might combine base notes like myrrh or cedar with middle notes of spikenard, and top notes, something sharp or floral like mint or rose. These layers weren't scientific, they were intuitive. You'd build your blend like a story. Slow beginning, intriguing middle, satisfying end. You watch now as an apprentice hands over a clay stopper marked with charcoal symbols. A custom order, perhaps. Every elite Roman wanted their own signature scent, something exclusive, something people would remember when they entered the room or left it. Here's your quirky tidbit. Roman perfumers sometimes added unusual ingredients, a scrap of deer musk for intensity, a hint of burnt beeswax for warmth. One recipe from the Medicina Pliny even suggests adding crushed oyster shell for texture, presumably not for the scent, unless you want to smell like low tide. And we haven't even gotten to the aging process. Yes, some Roman perfumes were aged like wine. The idea was that letting a blend rest, sealed, dark, cool, allowed the ingredients to mellow and mingle. Some perfumes were aged for a year, others for decades. Pliny the Elder once mentioned a scent so old and rich it could be sold as an aphrodisiac or, failing that, a very convincing bribe. You glance now at the shelves along the back wall, rows of tiny ceramic jars, stoppered and sealed. Some are labelled in ink, others not at all. One has a faded note in Latin, for Livia, do not dilute. Whoever Livia was, she had standards. Not everything went into little jars, though. Perfumed powders and pastes were also popular. You watch as a craftsman grinds dried rose petals with chalk to make a body dust. Another combines honey with lavender to make a sticky balm for sore muscles and romantic evenings. And here's a sensory oddity. Romans believed scent had medicinal properties. You didn't just smell good, you felt better. Iris root for calming nerves, mint to awaken the mind. Even garlic oil had its advocates. You're skeptical. The workshop is a swirl of motion now. A new shipment of cinnamon bark has arrived from Ceylon, carefully wrapped in waxed cloth. The perfumer inspects it, snaps off a piece and nods approvingly. Another assistant brings over a dish of lily bulbs, half-dried and fragrant. This isn't a factory, it's a theatre, an olfactory drama. You're watching a performance that very few people in Rome ever saw. The rich wore the perfume, the poets wrote about it, the street vendors sold knockoffs of it, but here? This is where the scent was born. It's hot, it's chaotic, it smells a bit like heaven if heaven were humid and slightly overrun with cats. But this is the heart of the operation, the real glamour. It starts here, with crushed flowers, warm oil, a slow stir, and a practiced nose. And as you step outside, blinking in the Roman sun, the scent follows you, rich, earthy, and just a bit smoky. You've smelled the source now, you're back on the cobbled streets, the perfume workshop fading behind you, but the blend of myrrh and crushed iris still lingers in your hair like a secret whispered too close. You walk slowly now because tonight you're heading to the baths, and yes, that means everything you think it does. Steam, heat, naked chatter, and more oil than a well-sourced salad. But this isn't just hygiene, this is a scent ritual, a performance, a deeply Roman kind of clean. The thermae loom ahead, sprawling across an entire city block. You pass through towering arches, the marble cool underfoot, and into the apoditerium, or changing room. There's laughter echoing off tile and stone, sandals squeaking, and the soft thud of a man dropping a jug of olive oil with a groan of resignation. Because here's the thing, Romans didn't bathe with soap, they bathed with oil. Scented oil if they had the means. You strip off your tunic in this dream, modesty is optional, hand it to a slave, and step into the first chamber. The tepidarium is warm and misty. It smells faintly of cedar benches and citrus rinds scattered on the floor. You notice someone rubbing his arms with a blend of rosemary and juniper oil, meant to open the pores. Across the room, a pair of women are discussing which perfumes make them feel most like a goddess. One votes for saffron, the other insists on crushed myrtle with rose. The caldarium, or hot room, is next. You pass through a veil of steam, and suddenly it's like walking into a forest sauna. The air is thick with humidity and the faint sharpness of eucalyptus leaves, imported by someone with taste and connections. Every breath you take here feels medicinal, deliberate. You sit, let the sweat bead on your skin, and watch as attendants make their rounds with brass strigils, curved scraping tools used to remove oil, sweat, and dirt. But before they scrape, they slather. Rich, scented oil, often prepared in the baths themselves, rubbed in broad strokes along backs, legs, and shoulders. Here's your mainstream fact. Public bathing was a daily event for many Romans, and scent was part of the experience, not just a luxury. Oils were infused with herbs, flowers, and even vinegar, yes, vinegar, to cleanse and invigorate. Afterward, you'd smell not just clean, but intentionally, luxuriously human. Some bathhouses even had perfume stalls, small counters where you could purchase post-bath oil blends. Think of it like grabbing a latte after yoga, except the latte is a vial of spikenard rose oil, and instead of foam, there's beeswax. You now enter the frigidarium, the cold plunge. One man gasps as he drops into the icy pool. Another calmly submerges, sighs and rises again, water dripping from his oiled skin. The contrast between heat and chill, oil and water, scent and skin, it's part of the magic. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some bathhouses were known for their signature scents. One might use pine-scented oils from Germania, while another might be famed for a blend involving fennel and honey. Yes, honey. Romans loved sticky sweet notes, especially after a sweat. More than one poet mocked the post-bath crowd for smelling like dessert. You step into a small alcove where a man is offering massage, a bit of clove oil, kneaded into shoulders, followed by a vigorous wipe with linen cloth. It's not luxury, it's therapy. He swears it cures melancholy, headaches, even heartbreak. You believe him. Or maybe the clove oil is just really, really convincing. Historians still argue how perfumed the average Roman truly was after a bath. Some sources suggest the elite went all out, layering scents after each bathing stage, while others insist the heavy application was more for special occasions. But there's no question that bathing and perfuming went hand in hand. Even the slaves who cleaned the floors sometimes carried traces of oil, leftovers from scraped skin and scented runoff. One man's waste oil might be another man's cologne, diluted, reused, repurposed. It's not glamorous, but it's real. You walk back toward the changing room now, your skin glowing, your muscles loose, your senses overwhelmed in the best way. Someone tosses you a small jar, a thank you, or maybe a flirtation. Inside is a balm of myrrh and lemon peel, thick and waxy. You dab a bit on your wrist. It smells like confidence. Outside, the sun is setting. You step into the twilight, skin warm, scent trailing behind you like a memory. And for the next few hours, wherever you go, people will know you've just come from the baths, because you won't just look clean, you'll smell Roman. The moon has risen now, casting a soft silver wash over the tiled rooftops and statues of the city. The streets have quieted, mostly. But in the wealthy neighbourhoods of the Palatine Hill, the air is still laced with laughter, flickering torchlight, and the unmistakable waft of something spicy and very expensive. Because, friend, you're not done with perfume just yet. Tonight, you're slipping into the private world of Rome's elites. Behind the heavy wooden doors and velvet-draped thresholds, there's a party happening. And unlike the public baths, this is where scent becomes status, performance, even flirtation. You're on. You're here not as a guest, but as a silent observer, just drifting from room to room, nose first. You enter a dimly lit atrium. A marble floor, polished to near-mirror shine, reflects the glow of oil lamps. The hostess of this convivium, a dinner party, yes, but also so much more, wears a sheer gown laced with threads of gold and, more importantly, a blend of lotus, almond, and a whisper of musk. When she moves, her scent lingers a moment behind her, like a secret dare. You remember the blend from earlier in the perfumer's shop. Reserved for the highest bidders. Rare, imported, and according to rumour, once worn by Cleopatra herself. That rumour has made it 3 times as valuable and 10 times as desirable. As you pass through the triclinium, where couches line the walls and guests recline on pillows with goblets of wine, you begin to notice how strategic scent has become. That senator over there, he's drenched, perhaps too confidently, in a blend of cinnamon and peppercorn. Bold, punchy, slightly overwhelming. His conversation is about the grain tax, but all you can think is someone's trying to impress the Praetorian Guard. Next to him, a young poet, barely older than a boy, has chosen a subtler mix. Rose with a hint of civet. Expensive, sensual, and just faintly animalic. You suspect it's borrowed, possibly stolen. Here's a mainstream fact. In elite Roman society, perfume was often judged more critically than your toga or your haircut. The wrong scent could mark you as cheap, or worse, foreign in the wrong way. Too much incense? Trying too hard. Too floral. Unmanly. No scent at all. Barbaric. You wander through to a smaller room, the music chamber, lutes, flutes, the gentle thrum of a double-reeded aulos. Here the scent is lighter. Violet water misted into the air from delicate bronze spritzers, wielded by silent slaves who glide between guests like stagehands. The room smells like springtime in Etruria, and everyone looks just a little dreamier than they should. And here's your quirky tidbit. Wealthy Romans didn't just perfume themselves, they perfumed their homes. Floors were rubbed with aromatic oils, curtains were soaked in spikenard-infused water. Some hosts even had hidden reservoirs under the floorboards that released scented steam when heated. It was less air freshener, more olfactory theatre. You find yourself in the garden courtyard now, under a pergola dripping with blooming jasmine. At the centre, a marble fountain bubbles, and yes, it's been spiked with rosewater. The whole courtyard smells like a poem, and in the corner, away from the laughter, is a more intimate scene. A woman leans in close to her companion. She's wearing something strange, pungent, resinous, a little like pine tar, but richer. You recognize it as laudanum, a sticky substance harvested from rock rose bushes by rubbing goat fur across the leaves. Yes, goat fur. And yes, someone had to scrape it off. Historians still argue whether this scent was considered erotic or just unusual, but in this moment, watching the effect it has on her companion, you're inclined to believe the former. You start to notice patterns. Younger guests tend toward lighter, floral blends. Older patricians lean into spice and wood, possibly to mask the scent of too much wine and decades of Senate debates. And the host, he's wearing nothing but pure ambergris, a waxy substance harvested from the digestive systems of whales, exotic, expensive, slightly fishy, but powerfully musky. If you can pull it off, you're royalty. If not, well, you're a fishmonger in denial. Someone offers you a tiny ceramic jar. Inside is a blend so complex you can't identify a single note. It smells like temples and libraries and first crushes. You smile and tuck it away, because tonight is about collecting stories, not just scents. And as the party winds down, somewhere between dessert wine and drunken poetry, you notice people starting to lean into each other more. The perfumes have softened on skin warmed by body heat and candlelight. They're no longer statements, they're suggestions, whispers. You step out into the night again. Behind you, music continues. The laughter fades, but the scent stays with you. It smells like power, desire, performance, and maybe just a hint of goat. You wake up, figuratively of course, in a quieter part of Rome the next morning. Gone are the perfumed courtyards and glittering dinner guests. Instead, you're meandering through a sun-drenched alley in the Subura district, where linen flaps dry between windows and chickens are absolutely where they shouldn't be. This is the other side of the scent story, the ordinary Roman's relationship to fragrance. The smell here isn't all roses. It's sweat, fish brine, overripe figs, and something sulphurous you decide not to investigate. But even here, among the hustle of carts and the scrape of sandals, perfume has its place. You step into a modest taberna, a perfumer's stall wedged between a bakery and a shop selling knockoff marble figurines. Inside, the shelves are crammed with little glass vials and clay pots. Nothing fancy. No gold-stoppered amphorae or rare oils from India. Just basic blends for basic needs. A mother inspects a jar labelled unguenta rosae, rose ointment. She sniffs, dabs a bit on her wrist, shrugs. It's slightly rancid. She buys it anyway. It's cheaper than vinegar, and at least makes the laundry smell like someone tried. Here's your mainstream fact. Even lower-class Romans had access to scented oils and rudimentary perfumes, though they were diluted, mass-produced, or made from second-rate ingredients. Old oil, dried herbs, a little beeswax to hold it together. Not luxury, but not nothing. You watch a teenage boy, probably fresh from a failed date, asking the shopkeeper if there's anything that makes you smell richer. The man hands him a small vial with a straight face. The label? Imperial Confidence. It smells like overcooked mint and regret. He buys it anyway. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Some poorer Romans got creative. They'd bury orange peels in jars of olive oil for a week, then strain it for homemade cologne. One soldier's letter to his wife asks her to send that thyme mix you made last Saturnalia. A romantic gesture, or just a desperate plea to stop smelling like cavalry? You step back out into the street and notice a line forming outside a public phalonica, a laundry. Yes, Romans didn't do their own washing, and no, it wasn't pleasant. Fullers cleaned tunics using, brace yourself, aged human urine. The ammonia worked wonders on stains, but the smell, indelible. Which is why once your tunic came back bright white, but reeking of public toilet, you'd reach for your scented oil. A quick dab on the collar, maybe a little on the hem. Anything to shift the olfactory balance. You pass a small temple, and even here scent is present. Burnt incense curls skyward from a bronze brazier. Not expensive frankincense, more like dried myrtle leaves and pine twigs. But the point is the same, to carry prayers, to cleanse the space, to make the gods feel a little more at home. And speaking of gods, you overhear a street preacher shouting about how true virtue smells like nothing. Stoics always spoiling the party. There's a woman selling sachets, tiny cloth pouches, filled with lavender, mint, or dried rose petals. Housewives tuck them under pillows or into tunics. Think of them as the ancient Roman answer to dryer sheets. The woman hands one to a child, who presses it to his nose and smiles like he's just discovered magic. You smile too. Historians still argue how common homemade scenting rituals were among the poor. Some say it was rare. Others point to the dozens of folk recipes scrawled in the margins of old manuscripts, signs that ordinary people were always mixing, steeping, inventing. You pass a doorway where someone's boiling herbs in a pot. Rosemary and thyme. A makeshift air freshener, probably someone's idea of a cure for colds, or maybe just an attempt to cancel out the fishmonger next door. The smell is sharp, but comforting. And now you spot a group of girls seated outside a tenement, combing one another's hair, and passing around a tin of violet-scented salve. They giggle. One insists it's what the Empress uses. Another swears it attracts gladiators. The truth? It's mostly lard and colouring, but the magic is real. You turn a corner and find a beggar smearing something across his sleeves. You pause, he grins and explains it's just crushed mint, so the gods don't think I've given up. You nod, because really that's the heart of it. For the elite, perfume is performance. For the bathers, it's ritual. For the lovers, it's flirtation. But for the everyday Roman, it's hope. It's trying. It's saying, I may not own a villa or an amphora of saffron oil or even shoes that match, but I can still smell like someone who wants to live a little longer, who still believes the day might bring something better. You inhale again, and the mix of aromas, rich, rough, honest, feels more human than anything you've smelled so far. This isn't the Rome of poets and emperors. This is the Rome of survival and resilience and stubborn dignity. And for a moment, you like it best. As the sun lifts higher into the sky, casting long shadows across the terracotta rooftops, you find yourself heading toward the harbour. Yes, the Portus, Rome's beating briny heart. Here, in the constant clatter of ropes and foreign tongues, is where the perfume story begins, again. Not with blending or bottling, but with arrival. You walk along the docks, careful not to trip over fish crates, coils of hemp, or the occasional snoozing cat. The air is thick with salt, dried seaweed, and what can only be described as ambition. Because floating in these wooden crates, lashed tight with rope and wax seals, are the very ingredients that make Roman perfumery possible. Take a peek into one of the incoming shipments. Shipments. Inside, frankincense from Arabia, wrapped in palm leaves. Myrrh from Punt, an ancient region that's still debated today, though many think it lay near modern-day Somalia. Spikenard root from the Himalayas, stiff and hairy like a badly kept wig. Each one of these fragrant fragments has travelled weeks, sometimes months, by sea and caravan to get here. Here's your mainstream fact. Rome didn't just use perfume. It built a trade empire partially fueled by it. Spices, resins, and aromatic woods were among the most valuable imports. Perfume wasn't just pleasure, it was politics, economy, even warfare. Julius Caesar himself reportedly sent ships to secure balsam groves after conquering Judea. You stop near a warehouse door flung wide open, revealing workers unloading tightly corked amphorae of cedar oil. They smell sharp, clean, like someone tried to bottle a forest. One amphora slips and cracks. The scent wafts out like a wooden sigh, and everyone nearby turns toward it, half irritated, half impressed. Nearby, a merchant argues about a delayed shipment of cassia bark, a cousin of cinnamon. He claims he's been waiting 3 weeks, and his clients are starting to smell like nothing, a grave insult in this world. Quirky tidbit for you, ancient customs officers actually sniffed and tasted the contents of imported oils to verify quality. A bad batch might be watered down with fish oil or thickened with pine pitch. One famous case involved a shipment of rose oil that turned out to be rancid goose fat with flower petals floating in it. The merchant was fined and forced to smell like himself for an entire month. Allegedly. You wander farther into the warehouse quarter, past clay jars sealed with wax, each bearing painted sigils and inscriptions. From Alexandria, blessed by Serapis, for Senate use only. Some smell divine, others not so much. Historians still argue over how much of Rome's scent economy was local versus imported. While many ingredients came from abroad, some workshops experimented with domestic botanicals, juniper, sage, violets. Even saffron fields were planted in parts of southern Italy to reduce dependence on eastern imports, but prestige still clung to foreign goods. A perfume made in Cappadocia carried more weight than one from Campania. You pass a small stall where a Greek trader is showcasing perfume stones. Clay beads soaked in oil, wrapped in gauze, and used to scent drawers, tunics, even breath. Yes, some Romans would suck on them before a kiss. He catches your eye, gives a wink, and offers you one that smells faintly of cardamom and pine sap. You decline politely because it also smells a bit like wet goat. Further down the quay, 2 workers unload carved ivory boxes, containers for perfume so precious they were art objects themselves. Perfume wasn't just a liquid. It was a gift, a bribe, a love letter. To hand someone a jar of spikenard was to whisper, "I have travelled great distances to smell like this, and now you can too." In one corner of the port, a scholar with ink-stained fingers is dictating inventory to a scribe. She's noting the different blends, recording where they'll go next. 1 jar to a senator's wife, 2 to a temple priestess, 1 to a brothel in Trastevere. Equal opportunity aroma. And that, friend, is a secret truth of Roman scent culture. Perfume cut across class lines, professions, even reputations. A priest might wear the same blend as a dancer. A gladiator might anoint himself with the same oil a widow used for mourning. Scent didn't care about your job. It cared about your presence. A breeze kicks up from the sea, carrying with it the mingled aroma of all those crates and amphorae. Sweet, sharp, woody, musky. You take a deep breath, and it fills your lungs with history. This, you realize, is the bloodstream of the Roman perfume world. The trade routes, the sailors, the anonymous noses who risked storms and pirates to bring back something fragrant enough to chase the smell of battlefields, latrines, and disappointment from the skin of empire. And now you follow the scent trail inland, away from the port, away from the clamouring shouts and wet nets and lazy cats. You don't know exactly where it will lead yet, but you know it will smell incredible. Your sandals crunch softly over gravel now as you leave the harbour behind and wind into the outskirts of the city, where hills roll gently, vineyards unfurl like lazy scrolls across the land, and the perfume trail continues into more tranquil terrain. Welcome to the Roman countryside, but don't let the cicadas and sleepy olive groves fool you. This is where the raw ingredients of Roman perfumery quietly grow, thrive, and bloom under the Mediterranean sun. You're walking through a cultivated field on the Janiculum Hill, past orderly rows of spindly plants with pale purple blooms. The scent that reaches you is sharp, peppery, and faintly minty. This, dear wanderer, is lavender. Not the soft pillow spray kind you're used to, but its scrappier ancestor, used more for cleaning tunics than calming nerves. Mainstream fact, Romans cultivated many of their own aromatics. While they imported the flashy, expensive resins from Arabia and India, they grew lavender, rosemary, thyme, and iris root in domestic gardens, villas, and even temple groves. These weren't just herbs, they were perfume in embryo. You bend down to sniff a clump of spikenard growing under a trellis. Not true Himalayan nard, mind you, but a Mediterranean cousin with a gentler scent and less marketing prestige. Still, it gets the job done when mixed into an oil base. At a nearby villa, a garden slave is tending to a bed of myrtle. He clips the flowering branches with practiced fingers, dropping them into a woven basket. Myrtle was sacred to Venus and used in everything from love potions to body oils. You catch the faint aroma as he walks past, a sweet, peppery whisper that clings to your nose like a friendly memory. Quirky tidbit. The Roman term for these aromatic gardens was herbularius, and some villas maintained them not for beauty or food, but purely for the production of personal scents. Think of them as the original perfume farms. Wealthy Romans would even sponsor the cultivation of certain plants as status symbols. Imagine gifting someone a bouquet of estate-grown iris root. You enter a small orchard where citrus trees nod gently in the breeze. Bitter orange, citron, and something that smells suspiciously like bergamot. Roman authors like Pliny mention these fruits not for eating, but for their zest. The peel was scraped, dried, steeped in oil, and used as a sort of all-purpose deodorizer. Roman BO meets citrus zing. You pause under a fig tree for shade and listen to the bees working the blossoms. A perfume maker could tell you that fig leaf oil adds a sharp, green note to a blend, fresh and just a little unruly. It was sometimes used to temper sweeter resins, creating a more balanced scent. Because even in the ancient world, people didn't want to smell like dessert all the time. Historians still argue whether these countryside botanicals were used widely in elite perfume blends or relegated to household ointments. Some believe the true high-end recipes came exclusively from imported resins and rare oils. Others point to preserved amphorae with chemical signatures matching native herbs and argue that terroir, yes, like wine, mattered even in scent. You crest a low hill and find an old olive press beneath a crumbling shed. It's still stained from last season's harvest. Olive oil was the lifeblood of Roman perfumery, the universal base for ointments, salves, and unguents. But not just any oil. The best perfume makers insisted on cold-pressed oil from just ripened fruit, with minimal acidity and no smoke contamination. Nearby, a man is stirring a pot over a small fire. You get closer and realize he's gently heating oil with rose petals in a linen pouch. No metal touches the petals. He stirs with a wooden dowel and watches the steam rise like it holds the secret of the universe. This method, called enfleurage, was as much an art as a science. Too hot and the petals wilt. Too cool and the oil absorbs nothing. He notices you watching and winks. For my wife, he says, or my goat. Depends who complains first. You continue on, following a sun-dappled path lined with rosemary bushes. Their scent is intense in the heat, resinous, piney, almost medicinal. Romans believed rosemary improved memory and burned it during study sessions. Whether it helped them pass their law exams is unclear, but it definitely masked the scent of communal latrines. A bird calls overhead, and for a moment the scent, sound, and warmth all blend into something quiet, almost sacred. The countryside may not smell like the elite salons of Rome, but it has its own perfume, earthy, herbal, sunlit. And perhaps most soothing of all, it smells like things growing. You pass a small vine-covered shrine at the crossroads. Inside, someone's left a bundle of dried herbs tied with a red string, maybe as an offering, maybe just a keepsake. You breathe it in. Bay leaves. Time. And something else. Memory, maybe. And now you turn your feet back toward the city. Your nose carries more than scent now. It carries the land. Your journey takes you next to a place where scent meets science. Or, well, ancient science. You duck under a stone archway and step into the shaded courtyard of a Roman medicus, a physician, but not the white coat clipboard-wielding kind. This is someone whose study of health, healing, and humours includes a deep respect for aroma. Here in his apothecary garden the mingled smells are dizzying. Crushed marjoram, smoking resins, vinegar tinctures steeping under clay lids. You half expect to be handed a potion to turn invisible or fix your taxes. Mainstream fact, Roman doctors didn't just rely on scalpels and leeches, they believed strongly in the medicinal power of scent. Perfumed oils weren't just for masking odours or charming lovers, they were prescribed, rubbed into temples, inhaled during fevers, even used to treat melancholia and nightmares. A good scent, they believed, could rebalance a body thrown off by bad air or an unlucky star. You wander inside, past rows of shelves lined with clay jars labelled in barely legible Latin, Oleum nardinum, Unguenta myrti, Balsamum syriacum. The medicus is busy at a stone bench, gently grinding iris root with a mortar and pestle. He glances up and explains, for headaches and the occasional cursed dream. He invites you to sit and offers you a dab of oil on the back of your hand. It's cool, smooth, and smells faintly of violets and old paper, calming even before you know what's in it. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Roman doctors believed certain perfumes could literally drive out bad spirits. One 1st century text recommends frankincense vapor for haunted bedrooms. Another prescribes rose oil to banish grief after the loss of a pet chicken, and we thought modern aromatherapy was reaching. On a shelf nearby, you notice a set of glass rods used for testing oil viscosity, because of course, if a perfume runs too quickly, it won't cling to the skin. The medicus picks one up and demonstrates, dripping a tiny line of oil down the side. It moves slow, syrupy, like honey with ambitions. Perfect for elbows, he says, seriously as though you've asked. Historians still argue over whether these perfumed treatments actually worked, or whether they were just elaborate placebos. Some think they were psychosomatic, others believe that certain ingredients, like myrrh and cinnamon oil, did have mild antiseptic or calming effects. But no matter the mechanism, the ritual mattered. You glance through the open door to the examination room, where a patient lies reclined on a marble couch, a compress on her forehead, and a tiny oil burner beside her bed. The steam rises gently, infused with lavender and crushed mint. Not quite morphine, but it smells like something close to comfort. A student, barely out of his teens, shuffles by, reciting a formula under his breath. 2 parts nard, 1 part goose fat, stir counterclockwise. He bumps into a rack and knocks over a jar labelled unguenta appiana. The medicus sighs and says, that was for the senator's wife, now it's for the floor. You're invited to the back room, a dark, cooler space where the real concoctions are aged. Here you find earthen jars sealed with wax and labelled with dates from 2, 3, even 5 years ago. The medicus explains some scents deepen over time, their harsh notes mellowing, their potency concentrating. Aged oils, he insists, have more soul. You dip your finger into one of these mystery blends. It smells of resin, clove, and something faintly animal, not unpleasant, just bold. A perfume meant to be remembered, not liked. And there's another layer to all this, scent in surgery. Roman surgeons would often anoint their tools with fragrant oils. Whether this was for antiseptic purposes or simply to keep patients from panicking is still up for debate. Imagine being wheeled into surgery, your surgeon reeking of cinnamon and pine. Honestly, could be worse. Outside the apothecary, a small sign lists today's remedies for sale. Basil-infused oil for troubled dreams, myrtle balm for sore joints, cedar paste for the elimination of disagreeable neighbours. Possibly a joke, possibly not. You buy a small vial of violet oil for travel fatigue. It's overpriced. It leaks. You love it. As you walk away, your shoulder-brushing rosemary hedges, you realize that Roman perfumery wasn't just a luxury. It was medicine. It was ritual. It was one of the earliest ways humans tried to fix what couldn't be seen, touched, or named. And in a world without antibiotics, nightlights, or podcasts, that kind of magic mattered. You find yourself back inside the city walls now, where the afternoon sun gilds marble colonnades and even the street dogs seem a little more fragrant. It's time to follow perfume into its most theatrical form, religion. Yes, friend, Roman temples didn't just smell of dusty incense and flickering candles. They were immersive sensory experiences. Perfume didn't hover politely at the edges. It was the main event. Your sandals slap softly on polished stone as you ascend the steps of a temple, perhaps to Venus Genitrix, or maybe Isis, depending on the perfume of the day. The moment you pass under the portico, your nose is ambushed by a swirl of scents, smoky, spicy, faintly floral, and something animalic. You inhale. The divine, apparently, smells like myrrh mixed with goat hair, and a hint of rose. Mainstream fact. Roman religious ceremonies made extensive use of scent. Burning incense was thought to feed the gods, literally offering them something pleasant to inhale from the mortal realm. The more potent the perfume, the more powerful the prayer. At the altar, priests are anointing a carved statue's feet with oil, slowly, reverently, like painting a hope onto marble. You can almost hear the sizzle of the sacred blend as it meets sun-warmed stone. The crowd is silent, not from awe, but because everyone is trying to figure out if they're smelling cinnamon or cassia. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Roman temples used hidden piping to release scents during rituals, an early form of aroma machinery. In the temple of Jupiter, Capitolinus, it's said that when the incense burners flared, certain vents would belch a mix of smoke and aroma right over the heads of the congregation. Surprise! You're now part of the miracle. And it wasn't just temples. Funerals, weddings, even political rallies had their own perfumed signatures. At a high-status funeral, family members would douse the body in unguents, wrap it in scented cloth, and sometimes burn herbs as the procession passed, not just to mask decay, though let's be real, that was part of it, but to signal a passage into the sacred, the eternal, the fabulously expensive. You pause beneath a statue of Bacchus, god of wine and revelry, who grins at you with a crown of ivy and, judging by his sculpted nostrils, a deep appreciation for aromatics. Offerings at his festivals often included perfumed garlands, bowls of myrrh, and wine infused with spices like saffron and cinnamon. Historians still argue whether the lavish use of perfume in temples was spiritual devotion or social theatre. Were the gods truly being honoured, or were humans just showing off? If Jupiter required frankincense from Yemen, was that about piety or import receipts? At the base of the altar, you notice small clay pots left behind by visitors. These are personal offerings, tiny dabs of homemade oils, perhaps rosemary from a garden, or iris root steeped in wine. You lift one and sniff. It's rough, earthy, and faintly sweet. Not temple grade, but heartfelt. Near a side column, an old woman murmurs a prayer while untying a pouch. She sprinkles crushed petals onto the stone floor, and the scent of violets rises like a whispered memory. Her eyes are closed. She breathes deeply. You do too. As you leave, a priest offers you a small cloth, folded, perfumed, meant to carry home the sacred scent. You press it to your nose. It's spicy, warm, and oddly reassuring, like a hug from someone who once ruled an empire. Back outside, the air feels flatter without the temple's aromatic haze. You realize how much scent shaped that experience, not just as decoration, but as meaning. It guided your attention. It marked the sacred. It said, "This moment is different." You pass a group of young acolytes carrying amphorae of oil down a narrow street. They're giggling, pretending to bless each other by dabbing scent onto their noses. One bumps into you and mutters an apology as the sharp scent of laurel oil clings to your tunic. That smell will stay with you, not just in the fabric, but in the story. Because Roman perfumery wasn't only about beauty, it was about belief. By now, your nostrils are practically trained. They can catch a whiff of imported myrrh from 100 paces and detect low-quality rose oil with the disdain of a senator. But tonight, your final lesson before bed leads you through one of the Roman Empire's more unexpected olfactory paths, public entertainment. Yes, it's time for the arena. Now don't panic, you're not here to fight. You're here to sniff. You enter the great Colosseum, Rome's centerpiece of spectacle and social flexing. The sun glints off polished marble, and the crowd hums with that particular anticipation only found where wild animals and snacks are both in abundant supply. And here's your mainstream fact: the Romans actually perfumed their public venues. It wasn't just reserved for temples or private homes. At gladiatorial games, during intermissions or halftime shows, workers would sprinkle the crowd with scented water, misting rosewater or saffron-infused wine over spectators from high platforms called spaciones. No joke, Rome had ancient fog machines. The mist settles on your cheeks, cool, floral, a bit sticky. It cuts through the heat and the noise like a delicate ribbon, giving the illusion of elegance in a place where lions are minutes away from meeting criminals in very unfortunate ways. The audience, some lounging with garlands in their hair, wave palm fronds lazily. Vendors stroll the aisles, selling honey cakes, mulled wine, and perfumed sachets meant to be sniffed when things in the arena get intense. Picture an early version of aromatherapy for emotional regulation. Big cats attacking. Time for a sniff of clove and pine. Quirky tidbit. Emperor Nero, never one to underdo anything, once ordered the entire Colosseum to be filled with rose petals and had the mist laced with violet essence. Ancient historians grumble that the scent was so overwhelming it caused a few guests to, well, pass out. Nero considered the tea and cited this a success. You watch as a large canopy, the velarium, is drawn across the arena's top to shade the crowd. As it unfurls, it releases a gentle cloud of fragrance from sachets sewn into its seams, an early version of scented drapery. You breathe it in, it's musky, with a hint of cinnamon bark. possibly also pigeon feathers. Historians still argue whether these mass-scenting efforts were for hygiene, crowd control, or just another layer of Roman drama. Some suggest it masked the scent of blood and sweat. Others believe it was a way for emperors to show their sophistication. Sure, you're watching people get trampled by elephants, but doesn't it smell divine? You head toward the Hypodium, the underground network where animals, performers, and less fortunate participants were prepped before their moment of glory. Down here, the air is cooler, but you're hit with a less curated scent: iron, damp wood, animal musk, and something faintly medicinal. A handler is rubbing down a bull with an herb oil paste, not for show, but because some Romans believed a perfumed beast would fight better, or at least smell less distracting. And yes, gladiators themselves were often oiled before entering the ring, not just for gleam, but to keep their skin supple and mask nervous sweat. You pass a jar labelled Unguentum Bestiarium, a blend made for animals only. It smells like pine tar, mint, and fear. Back in the stands, a poet recites verses about the glory of Rome, while someone nearby fans themselves with a bundle of bay leaves dipped in rose oil. A senator beside them complains loudly that the scent is too common. You stifle a laugh. Then someone hands you a folded piece of linen, soaked in something spicy and strange. You press it to your face. Cardamom, maybe even a whisper of ambergris, that elusive scent harvested from the ocean and the backs of whales. Whatever it is, it cuts through the noise. In this place of heat and spectacle and rising cheers, that piece of perfumed cloth becomes your anchor, not just a napkin, a filter, a reminder that even amid chaos, the Romans made space for fragrance, because here even the blood sport had a scent budget. Twilight drapes itself over the rooftops of Rome now, softening the stone facades and quieting the chatter of the streets. You walk slower. Your tunic clings gently to your skin, still scented faintly from the saffron mist of the Colosseum. The city exhales with you. And now, to the quietest of Roman rituals, the post-bath perfume routine. You slip into the thermae, the grand public bath complex that hums like a social beehive. Inside, marble echoes with the slap of wet feet and the low hum of conversation. Water trickles from bronze spouts. Steam coils through the vaulted ceilings. Someone's dropped their sponge again. Mainstream fact: after bathing, it was standard Roman practice, especially among the upper classes, to be oiled down with perfumed unguents. These weren't just for smelling nice. In a world without moisturizing cream or deodorant, perfumed oils were the full spa package: hydration, scent, and maybe a little flirtation. You recline on a stone bench in the apoditerium, the changing room, and a servant hands you a flask of oil. The scent rises immediately: myrtle, cardamom, and a base of rich olive. You smear a little onto your arm and watch it glisten in the torchlight. Near you, two retired legionaries argue about which oil is better for joint complaints in the rain. One insists on laurel, the other swears by cypress and sheep fat. Neither backs down. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Romans believed different perfumes suited different times of day. Strong resins like frankincense were for morning invigoration, while gentler florals like lily or violet were reserved for evening calm. A perfumed circadian rhythm, if you will. You move into the frigidarium, the cool room, and feel your skin tighten as the air shifts. A boy wanders by offering cloth-wrapped sachets, mint and fennel for the energetic, anise and chamomile for the sleepy. You take both because balance is key. Someone nearby mutters about Pliny the Elder's dislike of overly aromatic youths. You imagine Pliny rolling his eyes at this very bathhouse, mumbling about moral decline while dodging lavender foot steamers. Historians still debate how widely available these luxuries were. Were perfumed oils a daily ritual for all, or just a luxury for the elite? Excavations have found humble oil flasks in middle-class homes, often refilled with homemade blends using garden herbs or market scraps. It wasn't about status, always. Sometimes it was just about routine. about scenting your place in the world. You dry off with a cloth that smells like sun and cedar, then linger beside a woman dabbing her wrists with a rosemary mint concoction. "Keeps away flies and suitors," she says with a wink. Outside the baths, you follow the scent trail to a tiny stall, half-shadowed, tucked under an awning. A perfumer is packing up for the night, corking jars and tying them in twine. He offers you a tester vial of something he calls somnus nocturnus, night sleep. It smells of beeswax, burnt honey, and soft herbs. You buy it, of course. As you walk home, streets quiet and oil lamp flames licking the dusk, you dab a little on your collar. A warmth spreads, not just from the scent, but from the knowing. You've spent a day in ancient Rome, guided not by battle cries or emperors, but by the gentle power of smell. In this city, perfume was everywhere, woven into religion, medicine, love, commerce, and death. It was invisible and unforgettable, much like the people who wore it. Now your steps slow to almost nothing. The city fades and your breath deepens. You're no longer walking through stone archways or bustling forums. You're drifting now like a scent on warm wind. The rich notes of ancient oils still linger at the edges of your senses. Myrrh, crushed bay, honeyed rose petals pressed between pages of time. The torches grow dim behind you, and you imagine the perfumer snuffing out his last flame, tying one final ribbon, whispering a wish over his jars for safe dreams. You stretch out beneath the imagined sky of a Roman courtyard, where stars peek through grapevine trellises, and a soft breeze carries the faintest trace of saffron from a neighbor's late-night prayer. You are not a citizen, not a slave, not a senator or soldier. You are simply a quiet traveler passing through the story, a witness to what once was. The olive wood box of unguents, the linen cloth perfumed for mourning, the oil smeared on a gladiator's wrist before his last match. Let that thought soothe you. No pressure to remember it all. The gods are asleep. The markets are closed. The scent of history will be here tomorrow. All that matters now is rest. So breathe in, slowly out. Let the night unfold.